The newest batch of Magic the Gathering Judge promos have arrived, and I have to say, it is an interesting mix of cards. There is one card in particular that may actually be a clue as to what's going on in Innistrad Crimson Vow.
The Magic Historian.
Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends, I hope the day finds you well. Now, I know, hat. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about some Magic cards. So if you're not familiar with these particular symbols on the cards and the idea of Judge promos, basically there is a Judge Academy where people who have signed up to this organization are provided promos for A, being a part of the organization, and B, attending little conferences and things like that. So these are limited edition promos. They're done in batches, and we have the newest batch to take a look at. And trust me when I say there is some interesting stuff to talk about, and some stuff that ties into Magic the Gathering lore, which is always a favorite of mine. So we're going to be starting out with an odd creature. Mizzix of the Ismagnus. All right, so Mizzix of the Ismagnus is a red, a blue, and 2 for a 2/2 legendary goblin wizard. Now, this already creates a rarefied air situation. There aren't a ton of legendary goblin wizards. It takes a lot to become a goblin wizard, and in all honesty, a lot of goblin wizards, they're not too bright. This is a very different beast. So, what does Mizzix do? Well, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost greater than the number of experience counters you have, you get an experience counter. And what do you do with those experience counters? Well, as long as you have Mizzix out, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each experience counter you have. Now, this is very clearly meant to be a commander to play commander with, right? I mean, technically, you can play with it outside of commander if you want to, but this creature does have a pretty fragile body and is going to be destroyed quite readily. That is circumvented by the fact that if you're playing commander, you send it back to the command zone and you can keep reusing this. And obviously, when you think about stacking up how long you have this creature out over time, you're going to be able to build up a lot of experience counters and make your instants and sorcery spells that are normally huge and expensive into cheap little spells where basically you can trim it all the way down. Let's say you had a spell that costs like a red, a blue, and 10 mana. You got 10 experience counters, all of a sudden it just costs a red and a blue, which is pretty sweet. It's got that growing power element to it, which feels absolutely awesome. And when I said this is a weird beast, I really mean it. This goblin in particular is interesting because it has a haughty look on its face, right? This goblin, she looks like she has this condescending attitude of, I'm better than you. She's in this crazy, is it contraption beast that's firing lightning off of it and everything, but she's totally looking down on people. I like the fact that this is what also makes her a 2/2, because this would obviously be a little 1/1 goblin under normal circumstances. But for a goblin to rise up to the level where they are both legendary and not legendary as a joke, but for absolute power, is an interesting concept. The idea that this one would just be like looking down, it's like, you're not as smart as me. You don't have the same kind of handle on magic that I do. And clearly, the more experience that Mizzix gets, the more that benefits you overall, right? You can learn a lot through this goblin, a constant process of improvement. So overall, I like this card a lot. But there are definitely more exciting things to talk about. So let's move on to the next card. We're looking at Uzuri, Claw of Progress. 1 blue, 1 green, and 2 for a 3/3 legendary elf warrior. Sensing a bit of a theme with the legendary creatures. I mean, this is really, let's be real. Magic the Gathering has shifted, and Commander has grown a larger and larger presence in Wizards of the Coast's mind, and on their spreadsheets, looking to get them dollars. Am I right? I mean, look at what they're doing with the set and collector boosters. They're clearly aiming at Commander players more and more, which is a mixed blessing. Commander players had requested for years for Wizards of the Coast to think about them more and give them more products. But now Wizards of the Coast is paying so much attention that Commander players are like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have asked for this. But anyways, let's get back to Uzuri. So, Azuri is 4 mana for a 3/3. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you get an experience counter. Surprise! I mean, if you had some way where you could use Azuri and the Goblin we just looked at in the same deck in Commander, it's not really going to work. But outside of Commander, you can build up experience in different ways, right? You can theoretically build an experience-based deck that is not a Commander deck, but it just seems like it would be not nearly as effective, but technically doable. All right, so at the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is the number of experience counters you have. So you can just keep growing your creatures to insane degrees. You do have to put out tiny creatures to get the experience counter, but the truth is, Azuri doesn't even care if they're token creatures, right? So you can literally just jank out a bunch of little 1/1 elf tokens, and each one you put out gives an experience counter. This feels like it would be actually much easier to grow experience with than the creature we just looked at, because there's only so many instants or sorceries you're going to be able to play in a given turn. But making small creatures is exceedingly easy to do in Magic, and you can have a number of permanents that will generate those counters. You don't even have to have instants and sorceries to do it. So this is a card you can use to generate experience at a far more rapid pace. And the artwork is absolutely intense. You have to understand that this is essentially a Phyrexianized elf, right? What happened was originally you had the world of Mirrodin. Mirrodin was created by Karn, and then what happened was it was corrupted by Phyrexian oil. It's actually kind of crazy how far back you have to go in the Magic storyline to find out when Karn got infused with Phyrexian oil. But it literally happens in the story when Karn is being created. I have a video called Karn's First Day of Life, and that's actually when he had the Phyrexian oil infused him, unintentionally, because Urza had tried to cleanse basically the matrix that makes up Karn's personality, and due to Urza's arrogance, he believed he had cleansed it completely of Phyrexian taint, but that was not the case. So if you want to know more about that story, I'm going to leave links to lore videos at the end here, so you can go and check that out. But regardless, what happens is Mirrodin was the perfect world for Phyrexian oil to take root, because it's a world where everything, essentially, is at least partially an artifact. Living beings that are born on this plane are born with metal embedded into them, part man, part machine, which is, I mean, very, very Phyrexian, because Phyrexia is the process of taking imperfect living beings and perfecting them. So you can see Azuri has been caught up by the Phyrexians. They call him the Claw of Progress, progressing towards completion, the Phyrexian ideal of perfection. And you can actually see part of Mirrodin, now known as New Phyrexia, actually, in the background, because we had an awesome an awesome block, actually, where Mirrodin ended up being invaded by this Phyrexian menace that had slowly grown inside of it, and the regular inhabitants of Mirrodin and the Phyrexians ended up battling each other for dominance, and Phyrexia ultimately overcame them and turned the entirety of Mirrodin into their new stronghold. And we're seeing them launch themselves out into the multiverse. We just saw Vorinclex show up on Call Time, and Vorinclex specifically was given life on Mirrodin. That's where he's originally from, New Phyrexia, right? So I love the Phyrexian menace and the concept of all this. Seeing Phyrexian, at least somewhat completed beings. I mean, look at what's loaded into Azuri's chest here. It looks like they've actually put some kind of power stone into his body, unless I'm misreading that, and that is some kind of talisman. But if you look at his arms, you can definitely see that he's been Phyrexianized. Take a look at his eyes. You can see that you've got little parts showing through his skin with a little bit of green corrosion and corruption. And, you know, just that sort of Joker-esque smile that he has is also got he's been driven mad, right? He's an elf, and the elves were the closest thing to natural beings that Mirrodin / New Phyrexia had, and he's basically been turned against his own people. New Phyrexia really is taking all this hope in these people and just dashing them to the ground. Absolutely amazing story. But overall, this is a pretty solid card. Make yourself a bunch of little dudes. Each turn, make at least one of those guys into a massive powerhouse. That's pretty sweet. And it's at the beginning of combat, which means if you can give yourself additional combat phases, you will get additional triggers, because it doesn't say at the beginning of the first combat on your turn. So you can do it multiple times if you have a setup that allows for it. Let's move on to the next card. This is Edgar Markov. This is the one that I said might be giving us a clue as to what's going on in Innistrad Crimson Vow, because there is a vampire wedding that is taking place in Innistrad Crimson Vow, and it's most likely going to be between Edgar Markov here and what's her name, Olivia Voldaren. That is my prediction. It's going to be Edgar Markov and Olivia Voldaren. The fact that they've chosen to bring Edgar Markov back in this, I mean, first of all, yes, this is very much a commander-oriented card. We'll go through the abilities, right? So he's 1 black, 1 white, 1 red, and 3 for a 4/4 with Eminence, and Eminence is a commander ability. So it says, whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. It's got first strike and haste. Whenever Edgar Markov attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Now this all makes sense because Edgar Markov is like the progenitor of all of the vampires on Innistrad. He's responsible for the entire vampiric line on Innistrad, and it makes sense that somebody would want to marry him for his power, right? So Olivia wanting to get together with him gives that kind of a vibe to me. Now, it might just be coincidence, right? But it totally has that feel to me. And this is a pretty solid card. I mean, every time you cast a vampire, you get an additional vampire. It boosts vampires. So it really does give the feel of an endless squad of vampires that will be showing up. And I do like that these vampires, unlike a lot of the ones we see portrayed on Innistrad, are shown in they're not soaked in blood, they don't look vicious and feral, they have a strong air of nobility, as if this is like a higher level of vampire, which it clearly is. Edgar strikes a very imposing figure, and at the same time, I like the fact that the bloodshed to come is hinted at by his crimson finery. It's fantastic. Now, we have one more card to talk about that ties into some awesome magic lore. And that is Carrick, son of Yawgmoth. So, 3 Phyrexian black mana and 4. So how that works, if you're not familiar with it, those mana symbols up there mean you can either pay 1 black mana or 2 life instead. So you could actually cast him by paying 6 life and 4 colorless if you wanted to. So he's a 2/2 horror minion. He's got lifelink. For each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So essentially, he turns all black mana symbols into Phyrexian black mana symbols. He brings Phyrexia, Phyres, with him, and that makes perfect sense for this card. Whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrick, son of Yawgmoth. So if you didn't know, he is, first of all, just so you know, he's not technically the child of Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth doesn't have any children. This is done in a flavor way. You know what I mean? So he is of Yawgmoth because Yawgmoth created Phyrexia, Phyrexia created Carrick, all that kind of thing. But he's not his son. Carrick is actually a really cool Phyrexian sleeper agent who grew in power. He originally was like in a shipwreck caught up on the shore of Teleria, and he wormed his way into Joyra's heart because Joyra was a sweet young lass who just wanted to be loved. So he took advantage of that to basically get plans about the Telerian Academy because he was ultimately there to cast down Urza, to try and destroy Urza. And he was actually part of the reason that the temporal experiments went wrong on Teleria, causing the time rifts, which caused the planeswalkers to lose their spark. Like, there's so many different things that are spawned from the actions of Carrick. He actually ends up being caught in a fast time bubble where time travels insanely quickly. So he was creating this massive Phyrexian army, breeding it at a rapid pace, and sending it out of the time rift to harry and harass Urza in an amazing way. It's an epic storyline, and good news for you if you're interested in it. I've covered the full story that covers this massive massive chunk of Magic's history. So if you would like to know about how Karn got his Phyrexian Matrix, how Carrick went from being a regular sleeper agent to being this absolutely massive threat, this absolutely massive threat. Sorry. This absolutely massive threat to Teleria. I will leave a link to the lore video here at the end of the video for you. So, anyways, this is a really awesome card. It really does encapsulate the flavor of the character. Anyhow, I've said everything I'm going to say. Thanks for coming by, my friends. If you liked the video, then like the video. If you love what I'm doing, jump on my Patreon. Thanks for coming by. See you guys next time.